afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the second edition of the Business and Policy Dialogue. We are very fortunate today to have with us Dr. Karan Avtar Singh, who is the chairman of the Punjab Water Regulatory and Development Authority. For those of us here at ISB, Dr. Singh is a very familiar person. We've had the opportunity to interact with him on numerous occasions over the past many years that our campus has been here in Mohali. But I'll still make a very short introduction. Dr. Karan Avtar Singh is a member of the Indian Administrative Service of the 1984 batch. Belongs to the Punjab cadre. He took charge as the chairman of this new regulator that's been formed in the state of Punjab in July 2020. Prior to that, 3 years preceding that, he was the chief secretary of the state of Punjab. He has held positions in various departments in the state of Punjab. And he is also a PhD from the University of Michigan. He's an LLB graduate from University of Delhi. And more than that, I think as a friend of ISB, thank you very much, Dr. Karan, for your time this afternoon. I also want to welcome Dr. Anjal Prakash, who's the research director and the adjunct associate professor at the Bharti Institute of Public Policy at ISB. Whenever we think of water and climate change at ISB, Anjal is the person that we go to, or rather we read about his opinions in the newspaper, including this morning. He was quoted in the Mint. So Anjal joined us from TERI, where he was an associate professor prior to this. Prior to TERI, he was in Kathmandu at the International Center for Integrated Mountain Development. Anjal is an alumnus of TIS Mumbai, and he did his PhD from Wageningen University and Research. So Anjal, thank you very much for agreeing to join us this afternoon. I know that we've got, as the name suggests, business and policy dialogue. The idea is to get people on both ends, from the academic side and from the policy making space on a particular subject. We are today going to be talking about groundwater development, irrigation and agrarian distress in Punjab, and how do we connect the dots. This is a topic that is of interest at any given point of time, but in the light of so many other incidents, so many things that have taken place in the recent past, this is something that's occupying national attention more so than before. And I think it makes good sense for all of us to be better informed on some of these things. So we have two experts with us. And Anjal, over to you to sort of get more out of Dr. Karan Avtar. Again, Karan, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Guru, so much, and welcome Karan on board. This session is going to be in next 1 hour. We are going to explore this opportunity for us to have a dialogue with Karan, and this is especially in the context of groundwater overdevelopment, irrigation, and agrarian distress in Punjab. So we are trying to see the chain of events which we are experiencing at this moment. What are the roots of these things? Is there an agrarian distress in Punjab? And if yes, what are the causes and what are the consequences of these changes? This is going to be in a webinar format, so we will be having a question and answer session with Karan, followed by we'll open it up for your all those participants who have joined us live. The way we will be going forward is that we'll have a couple of 20 minutes around to discuss directly with Karan. I have certain set of questions which I always wanted to ask him, so it's something that we will have a dialogue, followed by another 40-50 minutes of discussion that we will couple of minutes we will open it up for your questions. This is a webinar format, so you are all muted. What will happen is that you can write your questions in the Q&A box, and I'll pick it up those questions after the discussion finishes. So Karan, again, welcome back to the session. And let me just start with this question that have always been there, is in terms of looking at this connect that we were trying to see. What is we see that the groundwater has been overdeveloped in Punjab, and many areas have already been in dark zone. We also see that the Punjab agriculture is largely irrigated. One of the highest irrigated land is in Punjab. And we also see that there is an agrarian distress. Is there a connection that you see, and what is that connection?
Yes, Anjal, it's a very interesting and deep connection. And for historic reasons, I think it gives us very rich data for a couple of policy experiments or perhaps hypotheses which we can test with data. So I'll take you back to 1947 when Punjab was one of the states which was partitioned in India, Bengal being the other major state. And even at that time, this part of the subcontinent was an agriculturally progressive, productive, and water-intense area. But after that, we've had two national regimes, one in Pakistan, one in India, with different agricultural policies, food policies, which have led to different trajectories of what we could call East Punjab and West Punjab, which is the Indian Punjab and the Pakistan Punjab. So that, I think, is an interesting policy research topic. Secondly, and even more interesting, is that within India, with a single set of national policies, what has been the differential impact on agriculture in different states. And here also Punjab and Haryana, or the old Punjab, they stand out, being very different in terms of their trajectory from other states. As regards irrigation and the water crisis, we all know that one of the world's largest surface irrigation projects, the Bhakra Nangal project, was designed, developed by India, by Indians, constructed in what is now Himachal, Haryana, Punjab, Rajasthan. It was one of India's largest prestigious projects. But if you look back at, say, now come to 1965, when Punjab and Haryana were by and large surface irrigated. Canal irrigation was the major source of irrigation. Any kind of groundwater or underground water in, say, 1960 was extracted by mechanical, non-electrical means, such as Persian wheels, the charhat, which is the traditional Indian, North Indian way of extracting water, very beautiful, very sustainable, very friendly to the groundwater. However, after 1965, we've had three things happening in this part of the country. First was the food crisis, which hit India around that time. And remember, that was only 22 years after the Great Bengal famine of 1942-43. So understandably, the government of India was very perturbed. These issues were raised at the international level. There was a worldwide food program, if you remember, at that time. International research institutions across from Mexico to the Philippines were researching cereals, and all this helped India. It helped Punjab in particular. So we had the Green Revolution, which was a huge technological innovation and a huge adaptation by the farmers of this region, which led to historic highs in food production growth. In the range of 6 to 8% per annum, which is really unheard of in agricultural economics or agricultural history. The second thing which happened around the same time was the electrification of villages. In 65, Punjab and Haryana were one state, but even after that, both these states have been on the forefront of rural electrification, and these states had completed all village electrification, say, by 1972-73. And with that came then the adoption of certain food and nutrition policies by the government. Most notably, the expansion of the public distribution system to all Indian citizens. I'm old enough to remember that when I was a child, everybody had a ration card. So the ration card then in my childhood, not yours, was the Aadhaar card. So what youngsters today remember as the great innovation of India being the Aadhaar card in the IT sphere, the ration card and the concomitant food security, which the government provided to everybody in India, was a huge step for this country. And this was supported by the MSP regime, the minimum support price, which in recent events, there is a farmers agitation or movement, call it what you like, and there is a dialogue with the government of India, certain states, certain political parties. Everybody is reading about it in the papers. But I'm just reminding you that these issues hark back to perhaps the late 60s and early 70s. What has happened as a result is that Punjab, which never grew paddy, the only kind of rice grown in this part was basmati. Dehraduni basmati then was famous, but we all know it was grown more in what is Haryana, Karnal, and the Amritsar belt of Punjab. The geographical appellation today, as recognized by the International Convention, is that basmati rice is recognized as such if it is grown in the Indian states of Haryana, Punjab, Himachal, and Uttarakhand, and in certain regions of Pakistan. So this is the history of rice cultivation in this part of the country. But sometime in the 1970s, this state became India's largest surplus grower of paddy rice. And by 1985, we could see the concomitant rapid depletion of groundwater already setting in. As I said, there were some national policies which pushed this part of the country to produce paddy. There was also the state policy of subsidizing agricultural pump set electric power, which made it that much easier for the agriculture sector to produce paddy. And today we definitely, after 30 odd years of this constant overuse of groundwater, we've seen that every year the groundwater depletes by about 1 meter in terms of depth of the aquifer. And this globally, I'm told, is one of the biggest hotspots for groundwater. It is a big challenge. It's not going to be easy to address. It's not going to be easy to reverse, but sustainability requires that we reverse this trend. Otherwise, we are in for big problems.
Do you see that the present distress, which is the agrarian distress that we see in Punjab, is very much related with the groundwater overdevelopment and the decline in production and other associated problems? Do you see a clear connect, or is there some area that still needs to be established?
It's a very complex situation. At some point, if we discuss climate change, things get even more complex and chaotic. You're the expert, Anjal, but what I'm told is that with climate change, precipitation or the amount of rainfall we get in northern India will actually increase, which may make it more efficient to grow a crop like paddy. However, we are also told that the precipitation will occur in fewer and fewer days or weeks of the year, which would mean that we have to store this water somehow. It's going to be larger quantities to be stored. How we do it, it'll cost us trillions of rupees or even dollars, however you like to measure that. And then I'm told, and this again, you're the expert, I'm sure you can guide all of us, is the what's going to happen to the Himalayan rivers, to the glaciers which are receding. Again, I'm old enough to pontificate on that. When I was a teenager and used to go for treks in the Western Himalaya, the glaciers I've seen now, there's only rock there. So it's been very rapid. So if in one generation or two you can see such changes, it's not as if climate change is out there in the future. It's here, it's with us, and it's very urgent.
I'll come to the climate change question very soon, Karan. But it's very interesting to see that the recent some policy initiative which was taken by the government of Punjab has been really applauded in the especially communities dealing with groundwater, especially this policy initiative which enhances the water security for people of Punjab, and the Punjab Water Resources Management and Regulation Act, which is 2020. This empowers the Punjab Water Regulation Development Authority, and you are the first chairperson of this authority. So this is something which has come very soon in 2020 itself. My question to you is, what are the vision that you have? What is because most of the time what we see that the regulators are there, but they don't have enough teeth to to take right decisions, or at least direct the people to take certain hard decisions. And so what is the vision for the authority, and how do we look forward to seeing the problems of water restored in Punjab with the new law and the act that is in place?
So this is the first state authority in the country looking at groundwater specifically. Yeah. The very first water authority was in Maharashtra. It was a good 20 odd years back. Because Maharashtra is addressing surface water as its bigger challenge, the Maharashtra Water Authority also has over these years addressed surface water. Whereas in Punjab, our biggest challenge is groundwater. And so the act, the Punjab Water Resources Management Act of 2020, which you mentioned, it mandates that this authority look at groundwater on priority, and that's what we are doing. We've split our work into two parts, one easy, one more difficult. We are addressing the low-hanging fruit first, which is groundwater utilized by the industrial, commercial, and urban sector. We've already issued our draft guidelines. Those are out for public comment. We expect objections by the 17th of December, which is in a week's time, and then we'll be going ahead and finalizing those guidelines. Our guidelines are also a first in India and perhaps for many other countries, because what we are trying to do is not only charge for groundwater extracted on a volumetric basis. That's something which any good policy or authority should do. We are also trying to put in place a regime for conserving water and providing water credits for those who conserve water. The long-term view is that we should be able to build a market for water credits. Globally, there are markets for carbon credits. There are markets for other ecological services, environmental services. So these are mature markets. In fact, just yesterday, the newspapers say that the Chicago Mercantile Exchange has set up the world's first futures market for water. So that's a good sign. Which means that there are very strong institutions looking at the kind of things that we want to do in Punjab. And we're hoping that we will succeed. It'll take time. And then other states and nationally also, we should be able to move to a system where we have water credits. We establish a water market. And ideally, if somebody saves water and earns credit, it means that if they are paying for groundwater, they should be able to, with good behavior and saving water, not only offset what they're paying, but perhaps earn some money. So for example, if a paddy farmer, now paddy in Punjab is the biggest user of water. 1 hectare of paddy can use about 15 cubic meters or 15,000 cubic meters. It's a lot of water. And if the farmer can save even 5,000 out of that, if he's to earn those water credits at whatever they are priced, maybe 2 rupees a unit or 5 rupees, only the market can say, that's going to be a substantial earning for the farmer. And that's going to offset all kinds of other costs that the farmer has to bear in agricultural operations. So in the context of the agricultural distress or the farmers' agitation, which we see in some parts of the country, I think what we are looking at is a big positive. And I think as a market and a country, we are ready for it.
So that's very interesting to see the vision that you have made it out. Let me just go to the climate change question that we discussed briefly earlier. So the recent report that I'm very proud to be part of was this special report on oceans and biosphere. And the present assessment report also, when I'm interacting with a lot of climate scientists, it's very clear that the climate change is going to be changing the order of the day. Especially the Himalayan rivers, because if you see, Punjab is also very well connected with the Himalayan rivers, especially the Indus River system. So we see a lot of stress, especially because of the global warming and water regime is going to change. So what do you see in terms of the larger perspective that Punjab government would have in looking at the stresses that climate change is going to bring in?
So the jury is out there, Anjal, as you say. You're the expert in terms of what will happen to the Himalayan rivers with climate change. It worries us. The groundwater of Punjab, the recharge, presumably, I say presumably because we don't know for sure, but presumably it is from Himachal Pradesh, which is our upstream region, that a lot of this water comes. Our surface water regime, whether it's Bhakra Nangal, Pong Dam, Ranjit Sagar Dam, all of them are completely linked to Himalayan rivers. And if river flows change dramatically, if these storage dams, and they are the world's largest, if they become insufficient, what do we do? What would be the rupee cost of building more storage? What would be the environmental cost of building more storage? How much time will it take? Do we have the time? Or, if it's going to take 10 years to build effective storage, what do we do in the intervening period? So these are huge questions. They go well beyond Punjab or any state in India. These really, I feel, require international cooperation at a very high and intense level, because India, China, Nepal, Bhutan, Bangladesh, we are all in it together. We are all affected by it. And we need to build international mechanisms which can, draw in all this investment, garner the investment, spread out the benefits to all countries and citizens in a transparent and equitable manner. That's a lot of work, Anjal. Let's get down to it.
Thank you so much. Now, the experience with the groundwater regulation hasn't been very positive in India. Either you have cases where people have been flaunting those laws, even if they are they are not implemented in the letter and the spirit that it brings in. How do you intend? What are the pathways that you have to come as a regulator, and what are the things that you 1, 2, 3 things that you would like to do in the first 1 or 2 years of your regime?
So, like you mentioned, there are two things, Anjal. One, of course, is the law and what is mandated and how it is complied with by people. The law has evolved, I feel, in the right direction in India. The Supreme Court in a PIL known as the MC Mehta case, way back in 1996, had held that water in India is an asset held in public trust. And why the court needed to say that is because the law in India and our constitution does not bring clarity on who is the owner of groundwater. Is it the landowner? So, if I own an acre of land and there's groundwater underneath it, do I own that water? If not, what are my rights on that water? Can I use it? On the other hand, some countries have declared underground water to be a national resource. We haven't done that. For minerals, yes. We know all minerals under the surface belong to the government. So if in my acre of land I find some silver or gold or oil, it definitely belongs to the government. My only right could be some sharing or some royalty, whatever the law provides. So my own view is that for groundwater also, Parliament would have to take cognizance of this problem, this matter, and legislate. Ideally, in my view, it should be mandated that groundwater belongs to the government. As of today, the Supreme Court, which is the law of the land, says that it is held in public trust, which means although I may have ownership rights on the groundwater, I cannot use it any which way I like. There is certain regulations. The National Green Tribunal has placed certain regulations. And now state authorities like ours, it is our job to regulate this in an equitable and just manner. We are trying to do that. Like I said, we put our guidelines out. But like I said, our other approach is the market-driven approach, which I think holds a lot of promise because any market-driven approach is voluntary. Participants will come in only if they can see a win-win. And there is massive scope for a win-win in groundwater in India, in which people can get paid for good behavior, for conserving water, and society sees its water conserved for future generations.
You're definitely going to be watched for at least some years, and we have a lot of people who have joined us online, and there are a lot of questions which are pouring in now. Let me just, before I open it up, let me just ask you if there's anything that you want to inform the audience before we move to the next segment or our program where we will take questions from the audience.
So I'd like to look at the silver lining in the cloud, and I think a lot of hope, especially for young people in the audience. Those who like to read, I'd refer them to a book about Israel. So the author is Seth Siegel. He's an Israeli with American, he's educated in the US, and his book is called Let There Be Water. It is a story, it's a narrative about the successes and failures of Israel in conserving water. And I think it's a great book. And closer to home, we know about Chennai city and what wonders Chennai has done after suffering so much anguish in terms of its groundwater and where it is today. So if Chennai can do it, I think other cities, metros, states in India, we can do it.
So we have a lot of questions coming from the audience. Let me just start taking those questions and I'll try and see if we can get to some consensus and some discussion on this one. So all the people who are listening to us at this point of time, please do write your questions on the question and answer chat box, and we will take each of your questions as much as possible the time permits. Let me just ask you the first question. This is by Ankit Anand, and he's asking, why is the government not disincentivizing the water-intensive crops such as sugarcane as being grown extensively in Maharashtra? Not only from Punjab, but other places we see that there are not many disincentives for people to grow sugarcane in a water-scarce places. So, what is your views on this?
So, Ankit, what little I know of Maharashtra, the Water Authority of Maharashtra has fixed bulk water tariffs for farmers. As you know, in Maharashtra, most of the water comes from canals and tanks and river projects. There's very little groundwater, and so farmers are paying for it. But I think your question, it aims at the issue of why do not farmers conserve water more effectively when they grow a crop, right? They may grow paddy, they may grow sugarcane. We need sugar. We are an undernourished country. We are still not at that happy situation where most people are obese, except maybe, in your and mine income group, we have some obesity, but most Indians are undernourished. We need that sugar and paddy. Yes. So how do you conserve water when you're growing sugarcane and paddy, given that we need this food? Looking at other countries, I find it's not easy. So I can be glib and say, like, if we charge more for the water, presumably farmers will conserve it, but that may not suffice. Again, I would say that if we can show people the benefit of conserving water and give them a financial security, by which I mean a tradable slip of paper, it may be worth only 2 rupees or 5 rupees, but I think it nudges behavior amongst everybody. And it gives you a sense of pride, right? If you're a farmer growing 10 acres of sugarcane, if somebody comes and on your mobile phone gives you a credit of even 1,000 rupees because you've saved water, farming is very hard work. Standing 6 months. In fact, sugarcane takes 1 year to grow. It's not a 6-month crop. Sorry. Standing there for a year in the heat and the cold, in the sun and the shade, in the winter and the summer. I don't know, Ankit, if you've done farming. I come from a family. My grandfather was a farmer. I don't think I'm tough enough to do it. So it's a tough job. On top of that, we want them to save the water. I think we should give everybody a little incentive. It can be done. And it is. There are progressive farmers in Maharashtra. You can go to Jalgaon. Jain Irrigation from Jalgaon was the instigator, I would say, or the innovator. But now farmers have just taken it up on their own. And the aggressive way that they save water in that area, it's a social movement there. Every farmer takes pride in saving water.
Yeah, Karan,
I think that's the way to do it.
Yeah, there are a lot of questions, so I'm going to quickly, just take them. So Balshir Sidhu, he is asking a question about farmers in Punjab, which he says that has become accustomed to paddy wheat cycle, and no one can blame them since government policy promised that. So the shift away from paddy wheat, is there an option apart from compensating farmer for any loss that they incur?
Yes, there are many options. So paddy, as I said, is a non-traditional crop.
Yeah.
The alternatives could be maize or corn, soybean, other pulses, oil seeds, cotton. Punjab is a good cotton growing region. So these are alternatives. There are price and incentive issues, but they're very much there. And I think they'll happen, maybe slowly at first, but yes.
Okay, so Noor Kumar is having a very interesting question. She's asking in what ways in which new bill is different from the Punjab Groundwater Control Regulation Control and Regulation Act, which is of 1998, and which was observed to be too harsh on users and not in the large interest of the farmers. How is it different, the new one?
Yeah, so the new act sets up an independent regulator. That's the biggest difference. And the regulator may issue directions only after firstly seeking objections and hearing all affected parties. So the regulator sits separately from government, and is supposed to take objective decisions. And of course, like every regulator, these decisions can be adjudicated in the High Court or the Supreme Court. So there's going to be more transparency, more scrutiny of whatever we do.
There's a follow-up question on your talk, when you mentioned about Israel. The question is, how are we, any learning that from Israel or Singapore that we are able to adapt for the present scenario in Punjab? What are the learnings that we have?
The biggest learning is how to recycle and reuse water. So one of my mandates, which we will address after we've been through the groundwater issue, because that is most urgent. The second mandate is to set tariffs for urban water supply and water treatment. And it would be good if we could see, perhaps in 3 to 4 years' time, that all the wastewater in Punjab in urban areas is treated and reused for irrigation. We may not be able to reuse it for drinking. That's very expensive. Singapore does it. Israel also does it in part. But we have a huge demand for irrigation water, so it could be well utilized for irrigation.
There's another question of, are there any scheme in Punjab that encourages participatory groundwater management and that involves directly the farmers into the management and regulation of groundwater? It's a very good question. Are there any vision around this?
Yes, and this is an old scheme. It runs in the northern districts along the Himachal Pradesh border in the sub-mountain area. There used to be a World Bank aided project known as the Integrated Watershed Management Project. This was a national project. Punjab was part of it. And as part of that, in that water scarce part of the state, water users groups were set up at the block and village level. They are successful. They are running now. They manage common deep bores. So a group of, say, 50 to 100 farmers has one deep bore well, which is otherwise very expensive to put, and they manage it collectively. In the rest of the state, unfortunately, in agriculture, we don't have much common management, but for drinking water, we do. Practically every village in Punjab has a drinking water management committee, which manages the local drinking water scheme. They collect their bills voluntarily from amongst themselves and operate and manage the schemes.
So there was an old, program, which is Pani Bachao Paisa Kamao program, which was quite popular actually. So a question is, what is the future of this kind of program in the light of the new law that we have?
So I hope it has a great future, because it is, again, one of the first programs in the country which pays people for good behavior. I remember when I was a youngster, I had joined the service and started working for government, and there was this, I'm talking of 1988, right, when some of you were not born. So I was asked about the subsidy for electricity which farmers get in Punjab. And one person remarked that, subsidies are okay, but you should give them for doing the right thing, not for doing the wrong thing. And the implication was that if you subsidize electricity and it is used for overexploiting the water, that is the wrong thing. And if you pay somebody to save water, that would be the right thing. So the Pani Bachao Paisa Kamao scheme does precisely that. I'm told it runs in only about 3 to 4% of the villages in Punjab because it's a pilot scheme. But I'm also told it has succeeded as a pilot and that it will be rolled out in the whole state. And we will definitely support it in whatever way we need to. Okay,
very good. Kumkum Das Gupta, she's a journalist who writes on water, environment, climate issues, and very well known. She's written very many pieces and very interesting. She's asking if groundwater is made a national resource, as you said, how it will help farmers in minimizing friction and also ensuring equitable distribution.
Yeah, good question. It'll take a longish answer, so I'll try to be brief. Clarity in property rights, in my view, always helps every stakeholder. At present, we don't have clarity. Once there's clarity, and I may be wrong because I'm advocating that the nation or the state should own the water, but suppose it does, then the parliament or the state legislature can clearly specify which citizen will have what right to which part of the water. And so your rights and duties become much clearer. So whether it is conserving the water, whether it is treating wastewater, reusing it, we'll have much more clarity. And then the markets will open up. If we want investment, say, in treatment of urban wastewater, it'll be easier if the ownership and rights on water are very clear to the investors.
Let me bring
And
in
this
my
will be
colleague.
better for farmers also.
Yeah. Let me bring in my colleague Aditya Dhar. Dr. Dhar is my colleague here at ISB. Aditya, would you like to also answer this question, looking at Kumkum's question? Very interesting question.
Yeah, I think this is a very important question about how if groundwater is a national resource, what is the role of the state, I suppose, to minimize the friction? I think one big problem that comes up is sort of because groundwater comes from aquifers, even though, let's say, I own a land which might have water underneath me, it's also responsible for water somewhere else. This issue of externalities is very, very critical. As an economist, I do, I suppose, echo Dr. Singh's view that some delineation of property rights is important. But I'm also reminded that the work of Elinor Ostrom, the Nobel, suggests that there is quite a deal that can be achieved even when resources are not individually owned but collectively owned. So I guess the short answer to Kumkum's question is I don't know, and I think this tension between collective ownership versus individual ownership may need to be resolved. They may not necessarily have to be like one solution for the state. Wide. In some pockets you could have individual, in some pockets you could have collective. So instead of the common one-size-fits-all policy, if the solution is tailored to the local context, which could be a collect group of villages, a group of panchayats, that might be better chosen, as Dr. Singh was mentioning earlier. If there's ownership in those local villages, at the end of the day, if this power is devolved to the local level on which they can decide their own future and own thing, I think that might help achieve the consequences, or at least the vision that Kumkum is talking about.
Okay, thanks, Aditya. Nabrun is asking whether drinking water should be kept out of the market scenario, as you are mentioning. So, what are your views on this?
Yeah, you have a point. Again, I'll just mention a Supreme Court ruling, which is the law of the land, which says that the right to drinking water is subsumed in the right to life under Article 21 of our Constitution. If you take that further, it would imply that the state, the government, has an obligation to provide every citizen with sufficient, good quality drinking water, since it's part of the right to life, as the Supreme Court says. So to that extent, yes, if it becomes an obligation of the state, then it can't be left to the market.
Yeah. Okay. Vinny Anjal from Delhi, she has a very good question. She's asking, can you tell us about 2-3 solutions you propose to achieve agriculture water use efficiency in Punjab? What are the 2-3 things that you would propose?
So in a nutshell, without going into specifics, if we can give farmers a water credit, say if we can give every farmer 2 rupees for every cubic meter of water saved, as compared to a benchline consumption, say, of 2018. Mm-hmm. And if we can measure that, and we can build a system of tradable securities, water credits, I think it's feasible. The money is there in the system. Where the money could come from? Well, the state gives about 6,000 crores of electricity subsidy to the agriculture sector. When a farmer saves water, groundwater, he doesn't use the electricity, so that money becomes available for water credits. This is, in a sense, the Pani Bachao Paisa Kamao scheme, which has been a pilot for 2 years. So it's possible.
Yeah. So So another question that comes from Noor is about the learning that we have from other states. And there are many states which has experimented on groundwater regulation. Do you see any parallels which you can draw from other states?
So I mentioned Maharashtra and Jalgaon, Gujarat, Rajasthan. There have been good practices which can be replicated in other states. Definitely.
Yeah. Okay. On the bill, also again, there is another question is in terms of what are the provisions to ensure decentralization of power and decision making. So that's something a lot of people have questions in terms of centralized decision making process. And what do you think about this in the bill? How do we ensure that there's a
the act, if you read it, it envisages a state level water management plan and block level water management plan. So every panchayat samiti would have to prepare its block level plan, and then all those would get agglomerated into a state level plan. So there would be participation at the panchayat samiti level. And as you know, every gram panchayat sarpanch is a member of the panchayat samiti. So in some sense, every village gets to be represented.
Yeah. Okay. So Aravinda Padi is here, and I know him personally. They're doing a very good job, and he's asking a question. There are few examples to raise irrigation water productivity in specific crops that is acceptable to the political economy. So, what are the examples that we have? If you could just focus on those.
So come again, Anjal. Aditya's question is about examples for saving water.
Yeah, Arvinda's question is that few examples to raise irrigation water productivity. So very few of them that has us so related to crop productivity. So is there something that I'm sure I think you've dealt anyway about water use efficiency earlier, but in terms of saving water and then increasing water productivity. This whole Israel question is also in terms of, so that how do we dwell in?
Yes, Aditya. This is linked to the first question by Ankit on sugarcane, but let me focus on paddy. The water efficiency in paddy cultivation in India is quite poor. Our water efficiency is only about half that of China. So for every cubic meter of water, China produces twice as much as rice as we do. So we have a long way to go. And there are specific practices linked to, so given the variety that you're growing, firstly, there's a lot of scope for introducing better and new varieties in every state in India, which are more suited to the climate conditions. But given you've done that, then the time of sowing and what is known as the wet-dry method of irrigation of paddy. Indian farmers go wet. They keep paddy flooded throughout the 90-day, practically throughout the 90-day cultivation cycle, whereas productivity of the field, of the land and of the water, we are told is much higher if you go wet-dry. So you save half the water, you get more paddy. This is something which we need to train and extend across the country.
Okay. Yeah, there are similar questions also asked in terms of efficiency questions. But Dhanpal has a question which he's asking: is there any groundwater recharge conservation program that increases the water availability in the state? So Punjab or any other places that you think there's any recharge program which is going on?
Yes. So the groundwater recharge structures in Punjab are basically along the canals and the drains. The rivers being very big in Punjab, they tend to have their own deeper groundwater recharge ecosystem. So we don't interfere with that. But along the canals and the small drains, we have built groundwater recharge structures. They are difficult to maintain because of the very high level of siltation that happens in this part of the country. So that's a challenge. In 5 to 10 years, these recharge structures, they need practically complete rebuilding because of the siltation.
So the systems of price intensification, these experiments have happened, and I know Punjab also has many experiments. Is there any thing that we can draw as some kind of a positive experiment experiences that you had personally looking at SRIs, and that saves how much water it saves and also increases productivity. Any thoughts on this?
Good. So you put me on the mat, Anjal.
So these are questions coming from the audience. I'm just directing them to you.
Yes. So farmers in Punjab are very innovative, and the variance in their water efficiency is astounding. So, if we could just pick the best farmers and show all the others how to do it, I think we can save half the water. And that solves the groundwater problem, really.
Okay, Prakash has an interesting question again. He's asking that climate change is going to bring in a lot of uncertainty in surface and groundwater situation in the state. However, there is a human angle to this as well. People whose livelihood is dependent on these water resources will also be affected. How does the government go about future-proofing jobs such as agrarian jobs in the state? Has there been any thinking on policy circles around this one? This is something which is probably a large issue.
It's a great question, Pranav, long term. So, but to be frank, my knowledge is that the government's strategy on climate change is more short term, more immediate. For example, in agriculture, it is centered around climate resilience of the crops and making sure that our food security is not adversely affected with climate change in the next 10 to 20 years. The other downstream effects on the economy and on jobs, I don't think we have clarity on that, frankly.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Jashinder B. Singh, he's having another question. He's asking if water conservation has been done using rainwater harvesting, if that can be done, and this we may make water reservoirs and issues around credit to the contributors. So is there anything done in Punjab which has some successes in terms of rainwater harvesting?
Oh, yes, Jashinveer. As you know, in urban Punjab, if you have a house or a building on a plot more than 500 square yards, then a rainwater harvesting structure is mandatory. So if you're making a new building, you have to make the rainwater harvesting structure. In addition, in the larger cities, in the municipal corporations now, the local bodies are planning stormwater recharge. So as you know, only a small fraction of the total rainwater gets harvested in houses or commercial buildings. A major portion is on the streets and public lands, where you need to conserve it. So that's a new area. And we in the authority also, we would encourage and to the extent funds allow us, subsidize urban local bodies which go for stormwater harvesting.
Okay, so Arvind Padi has a follow-up question. He's asking if how solarization could help in sustainable water management technologies. I guess he means by the solar.
Okay.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, wonderful, Arvind. Yes, that's again a great thing to do. Early days, I think it'll happen quickly in India. So most states in India subsidize agricultural power to the farmer. One way to make the farmer a participant and an entrepreneur in the energy sector is to give her or him a solar power plant. So if there is a solar power plant in the village and all the farmers have equity in it, they can use the power either to pump out water themselves or they can sell the power. So you get the financial incentive straight away to conserve the water. So I think that's a great way to do it.
Yeah. Okay. There's another question is asking for steps that have been taken to help farmers in terms of innovation and induction of new technologies, optimizing groundwater use. So any thing that, if not taken, if you have anything in your mind which will be helpful for us to think for.
So yeah, one thing which is new is the Internet of Things. And it's already being tried in India. There are startups doing it. There are governments supporting it. The Punjab Agriculture University has started demo plots. It's fairly simple. It's not very expensive. So you can, so on the one hand, you would have a flow water meter on the tube well or the canal source. On the other hand, you would have soil moisture meters in, say, in every 1 acre of land. And you would optimize the irrigation on your land, depending on which crop you grow. So what the Agriculture University is to figure out the exact, it's an upper and lower limit, which is the ideal lower limit of moisture in the soil when for paddy you need to re-irrigate. What is the maximum moisture at which you should stop irrigation? And so when you fix these limits appropriately, you should be able to conserve a lot of water.
Okay, let me just bring in Aditya also. Aditya is, if you could just dwell upon it slightly more. Yeah.
On that specific question, I don't know what more to say. I did want to actually take a step back and ask on the larger, because I think one of the things that has come across in your vision, if I may say so, is idea of using a market-based approach. And you've mentioned that a couple of times. It finds, it's mentioned in the work that's happening in the government already with the RCT, with JPAL, and so on and so forth. We have, and I think this is a broader question for regulators in India. There are a lot of, I suppose, provisions and guidelines that they can issue. But in terms of the penalties that can be levied in case of non-compliance, for instance, you mentioned, you have this, fantastic idea that we divide up the state into 3 different zones. Based on the zoning, there is, different requirements, different charges being done, and it all requires metering. But if that is not acceptable or that is not happening, what teeth does the regulator have? That is, I guess, one question. And I think it also is linked to a second question, which is in the Q&A as well, which is how does a regulator maintain an arm's distance from the government, which might be prone to some, populist measures or so and so forth. So, generally speaking, not just from the state of point of view of Punjab, but if you can speak from a Punjab experience, that would be wonderful. But in general, the question of the lack of teeth the regulators have in the Indian context when it comes to conservation of environment resources. So if you could elaborate a little bit on that. Thank you.
So, okay, 2 questions. One is the teeth or the lack of teeth. That is evolving. Many states like Punjab and Maharashtra are setting up regulators, and the law does provide some, directory powers. And the law, as enunciated by the Supreme Court and the National Green Tribunal, is also evolving in the direction of giving, powers to either to the state governments or to the pollution control boards or the regulators. So that is an evolution. Yes, it may be slower than what you may like. The second question, Aditya, was of, that's an institutional question. The first one was legal, and that was of transparency, independence, autonomy of a regulator. I think there are 2 sides to it. There is one side that when you set up an independent regulator, who will regulate the regulator? So, when institutions are new, without customs, precedents to guide them, how do we go about it, especially in the first 10 or 20 years? And the second is that if the regulator has to be effective, it needs to be seen by the people as autonomous, independent, transparent. And that, again, is a building process. It's a slow process. So I guess this narrative is new in India. The electricity regulators, by and large, have done well. And I think their relative success has now made people in India, whether policymakers or the public, a little more comfortable with regulators than they were, say, 30 years back. So perhaps the time has come when regulatory bodies need to mature and show that they can regulate themselves also. And B, the people seem to be more willing to accept that whether it is toll roads and regulation of the tolls, whether it is water or electricity or any other utilities or goods, that regulators can function with a fair degree of autonomy and transparency in India. I hope it works that way. It's early days, so
okay. So now
we'd love to have. We'd love to hear from anybody on how a regulatory body can improve its transparency and autonomy.
Okay.
The Maharashtra water regulator has, in my view, done fairly well in this regard. So that's a good story.
So we are almost closing at the closing time for our discussion. Let me just ask you a final question, and then I'll go to Aditya just to summarize 1 or 2 key takeaways that you have, and then I'll come to Karan for last word. The question is, how does authority like yours intends to engage with academic institutions? So there are different academic institutions like ISB, and there are a lot of other universities and all. So what are your plans to work with academic institutions and the way forward to seek some solutions which are shared?
So we are talking to our, to the leading institutions in our region, which of course ISB is the first, and then we are also talking to IIT Ropar. And you may know IIT Ropar has been granted a fairly big grant by the Department of Science and Technology, Government of India. It runs into 100 crores or more on water technology. So they reached out to us, and we're very happy to, cooperate with them and see how we can get the best out of them from our point of view, which would be, for example, on the Internet of Things that I just mentioned. IIT Ropar is working on that, and they of course have their own agenda, which I find is a very ambitious agenda. So they feel in the next 3 years they should be able to come up with very cost-effective technology solutions for Northern India for improving water efficiency. And of course, we are talking to our state agriculture university, the Punjab Agriculture University, a couple of things they are doing for us, and we hope to expand this interface with academic institutions here and across the country, across the globe.
Yeah, that's very good to know. And I think there are a lot of academicians, also students as well, in the participants group today. And I'm sure there'll be a lot of people who will reach out to us, and we'll direct them to you as well. Aditya, any take-home messages that you would have from?
Yeah, so I think from a take-home message point of view, I just want to make one follow-up request, to Dr. Singh. And this is not, ISB has been working with the authority very closely, so we haven't had this issue. But on behalf of other academic institutions, I think, as you rightly pointed out, Punjab stands out in a close collaboration with state universities. And part of the success of Punjab's agricultural, success story has been by the immense amount of work that's happened in, by public institutions. So in that spirit, on behalf of other institutions who are, attendees in the audience, I have like two main suggestions I suppose to make. One is if, the authority could have, some social media presence, so they can, make their, guidelines, make their, minutes and things sort of more publicly available, so people can, comment on many of these things, which is already happening in the public sphere, but kind of sort of, I think I'm asking for greater, communication. And the second thing would be on many of the instances, researchers working in this area have access to a good amount of data. That's perfectly fine. But there are still, journalists. There's still, other academics who are looking for access to open data. So as the authority continues to, foray into Punjab's groundwater, landscape, whatever information that is being compiled. It could be even like applications being submitted, for approvals. If all of those things can be made, more available publicly, then I think it will create an ecosystem where anybody, not just select institutions, but pretty much anybody from any part of the state can come and click download and then provide feedback for the regulator. So I think a greater call for open access and more communication and transparency is what I would, as a final thought, just kind of.
Thanks, Aditya. With these thoughts, I'll over to you, Karan, for your 30-second closing remarks.
Thank you. I think Punjab and my regulatory authority, we have embarked on a very exciting journey. It's very challenging, and we look forward to huge developments in India in terms of the national policies for water conservation, and hopefully a national market for water and for conserving it. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Karan. So audience, we try to connect today between the groundwater overdevelopment, the intensive agriculture that Punjab is facing, and the farmers' distress or the stress that they are going through at this moment. We try to connect the dot, looking into slightly more deeper into where the problems may lie. So this has been an interesting startup for us for discussion, which I'm sure will go slightly more longer way. So with this, I close this program, but I over to you, Kumar, for your final words.
Thank you very much, Anjal, and thank you for anchoring this session so beautifully and for getting these questions conveyed to Dr. Singh. But to Dr. Karan Avtar Singh, I want to express my sincere thanks for not just taking time out to be here with us this afternoon, but more importantly, sort of to your response to Aditya's question about how as a regulator, as an authority, and you are the first authority in this state, and there are sort of ways in which you can set the direction and sort of make it easier for academics and for people who want to do more work in this space, especially to collaborate, and the idea is to sort of co-create so that there's greater sort of work in this area, and I think your response has been very, very positive. We know for a fact as ISB that it's always been like that. One of the things that I did mention earlier, I described Dr. Singh as a friend of ISB. When we first set up the campus here, or when we were talking about setting up the campus here in 2009-10, we spoke to a few people and we said, we are setting up a campus in Mohali. And one of them, who's from our partner school, said, you should meet Dr. Karan Avtar Singh. If whoever you meet or not, you should meet him and take his help. And over the years, we've actually collaborated when you were Principal Secretary Industries. The sort of prestigious Progressive Punjab was done here under your leadership and so on. So we look forward to continued association. And to our participants who have joined in today, thank you very much. I noticed Dr. Padi was there as well. Dr. Padi, we should get you on one of the future dialogues here. I saw Mr. Janardhan Reddy as one of the participants. So many of you. But thank you very much. And to everyone who's tuned in, thank you for your participation.